He tried to resist, but after a night of intense passion, the CEO surrendered to love. Hello, let's start another beautiful story. Welcome to my channel. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Let's go. The 50 story. Glass tower of Carter Technologies pierced the Manhattan skyline like an icicle, its reflective surface gleaming in the late autumn sun. Inside his top-floor office, Adam Carter stood motionless before the floor-to-ceiling windows, hands clasped, behind his back, watching the city pulse beneath him. At 35, he'd built an empire worth billions, but it was the solitude of these morning moments that he treasured most. His reflection stared back at him, immaculate charcoal suit, carefully styled dark hair, and eyes that his board members often described as penetrating. The press had dubbed him the Ice King of Silicon Alley, a moniker he secretly appreciated. Emotions were messy, unpredictable things that had no place in the corporate world. He'd learned that lesson the hard way, watching his father's software company crumble because of misplaced trust and personal entanglements. A gentle knock interrupted his contemplation. "Mr. Carter?" His assistant's voice was appropriately muted. "The innovation team candidates are ready for their presentations." Adam didn't turn. 5 minutes, Rebecca." He heard the door close softly and allowed himself one last moment of stillness before the day began. The Innovation Initiative was his latest project, a carefully calculated risk to push Carter Technologies beyond its competitors. He'd personally overseen the selection process for the design team, ensuring only the best candidates made it. To today's final round, the conference room was already charged with nervous energy when he entered. 6 candidates, each hoping to lead the project that could define Carter Technologies' next decade. Adam took his seat at the head of the table, noting how the fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the sleek mahogany surface. "Begin," he said simply, and the parade of presentations started. The first 4 candidates were technically proficient but uninspiring. The 5th showed promise until he stumbled over basic questions about market implementation. Adam felt the familiar weight of disappointment settling in his chest. Finding truly innovative minds was like searching for diamonds in... "I know what you're thinking," a clear voice cut through his thoughts. "They're all playing it safe." Adam's attention snapped to the final candidate, who had quietly taken her position at the front of the room. Ellie Parker stood with an air of quiet confidence that seemed to transform the sterile conference room. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple knot, her green eyes bright with intelligence, and something else, a hint of challenge that made him sit up straighter. "Ms. Parker," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "You seem quite certain about my thoughts." A slight smile played at the corners of her mouth. "With respect, Mr. Carter, your reputation precedes you. You're not looking for someone to simply maintain the status quo. You want revolution." Without waiting for his response, she launched into her presentation. But it wasn't like the others. Instead of PowerPoint slides filled with market projections and technical specifications, she pulled out a small device from her bag. "This is a prototype," she said, placing it on the table, "because I don't believe in selling dreams without proving they can be reality." For the next 20 minutes, Ellie Parker proceeded to demolish every preconception Adam had about the project. Her design wasn't just innovative, it was transformative. She'd identified problems they hadn't even realized existed and solved them with elegant simplicity, but it was the way she handled his increasingly probing questions that truly caught his attention. She didn't defer or apologize. She challenged him right back, her responses sharp and insightful. "Your approach has significant risks," he noted, watching her carefully. "Life does too," she replied without hesitation. "But that's where the breakthroughs happen. Something shifted in the air between them, a moment of recognition, perhaps, or warning. Adam found himself studying the way her hands moved as she spoke, the subtle changes in her expression as she defended her ideas. It was distracting. He ended the interview abruptly, standing with practiced smoothness. "Thank you for your time, Ms. Parker. We'll be in touch." Later that evening, alone in his office, Adam reviewed the candidates' files. Ellie Parker's sat open on his tablet, graduated top of her class from MIT, impressive portfolio of patents, glowing recommendations. On paper, she was exactly what Carter Technologies needed, and that was the problem. Because, for the first time in years, Adam Carter had felt something stir beneath his carefully constructed walls, a spark of interest that went beyond professional appreciation. He closed the file and walked to his windows, watching as the city lights began to twinkle in the gathering dusk. He had built his success on one fundamental rule: never allow personal feelings to influence business decisions. Emotion was the enemy of reason, and reason was what had made him a billionaire at 35. Yet as he stood there, Ellie Parker's voice echoed in his mind. That's where the breakthroughs happen. Adam reached for his phone and dialed Rebecca's number. "Send out the notifications," he said, his voice clipped. "Ms. Parker gets the position." It was a purely logical decision, he told himself. Her qualifications were superior, her vision aligned with the company's needs. The fact that her smile had lingered in his thoughts all afternoon was irrelevant. Besides, he had rules about workplace relationships, strict, unbreakable rules. What could possibly go wrong? The city sparkled below, indifferent to his thoughts, as night settled over Manhattan. In his reflection, Adam Carter looked exactly as he always did, controlled, confident, untouchable. Only he could feel the hairline crack that had formed in his carefully constructed armor, a crack that carried the faintest scent of jasmine, the perfume he'd caught as Ellie Parker had walked past him, out of the conference room and into his carefully ordered world. 2 weeks into her new role at Carter Technologies, Ellie Parker was already making waves. The innovation team buzzed with an energy it hadn't seen in years, and whispers of her bold ideas had reached every corner of the building. But it was the whispers about her interactions with Adam Carter that truly set tongues wagging. She actually challenged him in the project review meeting, one developer murmured over coffee. And he listened, another added, eyes wide with disbelief. Tonight, at the company's annual Innovation Gala, those whispers followed Ellie as she navigated through the grand ballroom of the Carter Technologies Hotel. The space dripped with elegant sophistication, crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered spectacular views of the Manhattan skyline. Outside, storm clouds gathered ominously, but inside, the atmosphere crackled with possibility. Ellie smoothed down her midnight blue gown, a simple but striking design that made her feel both powerful and feminine. She'd pulled her hair back in an elegant twist, allowing a few strategic tendrils to frame her face. Not that she was trying to impress anyone, especially not her impossibly handsome, infuriatingly distant boss. Adam Carter stood across the room, commanding attention without effort. His tuxedo fit him perfectly, emphasizing broad shoulders and a lean frame. He was listening to a board member, but Ellie caught him glancing in her direction more than once. Each time their eyes met, that same electric current she'd felt in their first meeting sparked between them. "Ms. Parker," his deep voice suddenly behind her made her jump. "I believe you haven't met Richard Brunswick from Vertex Systems." Ellie turned to find Adam standing much closer than she'd expected, close enough to catch the subtle scent of his cologne. Beside him stood an older gentleman with keen eyes and an appraising smile. "Mr. Brunswick," she said, extending her hand, "your work on quantum computing is revolutionary." "Please call me Richard," he replied, his grip firm. "I've heard impressive things about your innovation initiative. Adam tells me you're completely reimagining the user interface paradigm." "Actually," Adam interjected, "the details are strictly confidential at this stage." Ellie felt a flash of irritation. "I think we can trust Richard with the basic concept, Mr. Carter. After all, collaboration often leads to unexpected breakthroughs." The tension between them was palpable. Richard's eyes darted from one to the other, his smile growing more intrigued. "I'll leave you two to discuss it," he said diplomatically, melting into the crowd. Adam turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Miss Parker, a word in private?" Without waiting for her response, he guided her toward a secluded alcove, his hand hovering near but never quite touching the small of her back. The gesture made her skin tingle even through the fabric of her dress. "The innovation initiative is sensitive," he said quietly. "We can't risk—" A deafening crack of thunder cut him off, followed immediately by a flash of lightning that illuminated the entire ballroom. The lights flickered once, twice, and then plunged the room into darkness. Gasps and nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Emergency lights kicked in, casting everything in a soft, otherworldly glow. Ellie felt Adam's hand grasp her elbow, steadying her. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice lower, rougher than usual. "Fine," she managed, acutely aware of how close they were standing. In the dim light, his features seemed softer, more human. "Though I think your event might be ending early." As if on cue, Rebecca appeared, looking harried. "Mr. Carter, the storm has flooded several major roads. The hotel manager suggests guests either leave immediately or prepare to stay the night." Adam's hand was still on Ellie's elbow, his thumb unconsciously tracing small circles against her skin. The touch sent shivers up her arm that had nothing to do with the cold. "Start organizing transportation for those who want to leave," he ordered, "and have the hotel prepare rooms for those who need to stay." "Already done, sir." "Though—" Rebecca hesitated. "Most rooms were already booked for a convention. We only have a handful available." Bon. Another crash of thunder rattled the windows. The storm was directly overhead now, rain lashing against the glass in sheets. Ellie pulled away from Adam's touch, trying to clear her head. "I'll try to make it home," she said, reaching for her phone. "I'm sure I can get a car." "Don't be ridiculous," Adam cut in. "The roads are dangerous. You'll stay here." The authority in his voice made her bristle. "I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions, Mr. Carter." His expression softened fractionally. "Of course you are. But as your employer, I have a duty of care. Please stay." Perhaps it was the please that did it. She'd never heard him use the word before. Or maybe it was the way he was looking at her, concern breaking through his usual mask of indifference. "Fine," she conceded, "but don't think this means I agree with you about Richard Brunswick." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I wouldn't dare." As Rebecca led them toward the elevator, Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that this storm was about to change everything. In the polished brass doors, their reflections stood close together, the Ice King and the woman who dared to challenge him. The air between them felt charged, like the atmosphere before lightning strikes. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered, "Be careful." The Carter Technologies Hotel's executive suite felt like another world. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the raging storm, while inside, warm lighting created an intimate atmosphere that made Ellie increasingly aware of Adam's presence. They'd ended up sharing the suite, the only remaining room with two separate sleeping areas, after Rebecca's apologetic explanation about the booking situation. "I can sleep in my office," Adam had offered stiffly. "Don't be absurd," Ellie had responded. "We're both adults." Now, 2 hours later, they sat in the suite's living area, their formal wear exchanged for hotel-provided robes and sleepwear. A bottle of wine from the minibar sat between them, half empty. The storm howled outside, but in here, time seemed to move differently. "You never answered my question," Ellie said, curling her legs beneath her on the plush sofa. "Why are you so resistant to collaboration? The Brunswick proposal could revolutionize our project." Adam stood by the windows, watching lightning illuminate the city. His usual pristine appearance had softened. Collar unbuttoned, hair slightly disheveled. It made him look younger, more approachable. "Experience," he finally answered. "Every time I've seen emotions influence business decisions, it's ended in disaster." "Is that what happened with your father's company?" He turned sharply. "You've done your research. I like to know who I'm working with." Ellie took another sip of wine. "But I think you've drawn the wrong lesson from that story." "Have I?" His voice held a challenge. He moved to sit across from her, his movements graceful despite the late hour and wine. "My father trusted his brother with everything, the company, our future. That trust destroyed both, so you decided to trust no one." "I trust in facts, data, measurable outcomes." Ellie leaned forward. "And how's that working out for you? Are you happy, Adam?" The use of his first name hung in the air between them. It was the first time she'd called him anything but Mr. Carter. His expression flickered, surprise, then something darker, more vulnerable. "Happiness is irrelevant to success," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "That's the saddest thing I've ever heard." Ellie set down her wineglass. "Do you know why I became a designer? Because I believe technology should enhance human connection, not replace it. Every innovation should make people's lives richer and fuller and more human." Thunder crashed outside, but neither of them flinched. They were too caught up in the moment, in the charged space between them. "Your father's brother betrayed him because he was a bad person, not because trust itself is dangerous," Ellie continued softly. "You've built these walls so high, you can't even see over them anymore." "Yes, and you think you can?" The words came out barely above a whisper. "I think I already am." Their eyes met, and for a moment Ellie saw past his defenses, saw the loneliness, the yearning for connection he'd buried beneath years of self-imposed isolation. Her heart ached for him. "Tell me about your design philosophy," he said suddenly, clearly trying to steer them back to safer ground. "Why did you choose this particular approach?" Ellie recognized the deflection, but decided to allow it. She launched into an explanation of her ideas, her passion for the subject overtaking her awareness of the intimate setting. As she spoke, she gestured animatedly, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. Adam watched her with growing fascination. He asked intelligent questions, challenged her assumptions, but there was something else in his gaze, a warmth she'd never seen before. "You're extraordinary," he said abruptly, cutting off her explanation of user interface psychology. The compliment hung in the air, too honest, too raw to be professional. Ellie's breath caught in her throat. "I should go to bed," she said quietly. "It's late." Of course, he stood ever the gentleman, but made no move to leave. "Ellie." The sound of her name on his lips sent shivers down her spine. "Yes?" For a moment he looked like he might say more, might bridge the gap between them. Instead he straightened, his walls visibly rising again. "Good night," he said formally. "I'll see you in the morning." Ellie retreated to her room, her mind spinning, as she lay in bed, listening to the storm and Adam's quiet movements in the suite. She realized something terrifying. She was falling for him. Not the Ice King persona he showed the world, but the complex, wounded man beneath, the one who asked brilliant questions and watched her with wonder when he thought she wasn't looking. In his own room, Adam stood at the window, sleep eluding him. He could still smell her perfume, still see the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her work. She'd seen through his defenses with frightening ease, making him question everything. He'd built his life around. The storm raged on, but the real tempest was inside him. For the first time in years, Adam Carter was losing control of his carefully ordered world, of his rigid principles, and most dangerously, of his heart. Neither of them slept much that night, both acutely aware of the other's presence, just a door away, both fighting against a current that felt increasingly impossible to resist. The storm would pass, but its effects would linger long after the skies cleared, in stolen glances, in charged silences, in the growing realization that some barriers, once breached, can never be rebuilt. Monday morning arrived with brutal clarity. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crisp autumn day and countless unanswered questions. Adam sat in his office, staring at an untouched cup of coffee, his mind replaying fragments from that night. Ellie's laugh, the way her eyes sparkled when she talked about design, how perfectly she fit in the space of his thoughts. A knock at his door made him straighten reflexively. "Come in." Rebecca entered with a stack of reports. "Sir, the innovation team meeting starts in 10 minutes. Also, Ms. Parker asked to schedule a private meeting to discuss the Brunswick collaboration." Adam's jaw tightened. "Tell her we can discuss it in the team meeting." She was quite insistent. "The team meeting will suffice." Rebecca hesitated, then nodded and left. Adam stood, adjusting his tie in the reflection of his window. He looked exactly as he always did, composed, professional, untouchable, if only he felt that way. The conference room was already full when he arrived. Ellie sat halfway down the table, engaged in animated discussion with 2 developers. She wore a cream silk blouse and charcoal pencil skirt, her hair falling in soft waves around her face. Their eyes met briefly before he looked away, taking his seat at the head of the table. "Let's begin," he said crisply. "First quarter projections?" The meeting proceeded with mechanical efficiency until they reached the innovation update. Ellie stood, her presentation polished and compelling, but when she mentioned the Brunswick collaboration, Adam felt his chest tighten. "That proposal is not up for discussion," he cut in. Ellie paused, color rising in her cheeks. "With all due respect, Mr. Carter, this partnership could accelerate our timeline by months. It also introduces unnecessary risk. The only risk is letting fear dictate our decisions." The room went deadly quiet. Everyone held their breath, watching the tension crackle between them. "Ms. Parker," Adam's voice could have frozen flame, "my office, now." Everyone else dismissed. And as the team filed out, throwing concerned glances at Ellie, Adam could feel his careful control slipping. He strode to his office, not waiting to see if she followed. She did, of course. Ellie Parker never backed down from a fight. The door closed behind them with a soft click. Through the glass walls, the Manhattan skyline stretched endlessly, indifferent to the drama unfolding before it. "You're undermining my authority," he said, turning to face her, "and you're letting personal issues cloud your judgment." Ellie stood her ground, arms crossed. "This has nothing to do with the Brunswick proposal, does it? You're pushing me away because of what happened during the storm." "Nothing happened during the storm." "Exactly. Nothing happened because you're too scared to let it." Adam moved closer, his voice dropping dangerously. "You're out of line, Ms. Parker." "Am I?" "Because from where I'm standing, you're the one running away. You felt something that night, something real, but instead of dealing with it like an adult, you're hiding behind your position and your rules." They were inches apart now, the air between them electric with unspoken words and suppressed desire. Adam could smell her perfume. Jasmine, just like that first day, could see the pulse beating rapidly at her throat. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice rough. "I want you to be honest, with me and with yourself." For a moment, The mask slipped. Adam's eyes softened, his hand lifting as if to touch her face. Ellie held her breath, hoping. Then his phone rang, shattering the moment. Adam stepped back as if burned, reaching for the device with mechanical precision. Carter speaking. His voice was pure ice again. "Yes, I'll be right there." He ended the call, not meeting her eyes. "The board is waiting. We'll continue this discussion of the Brunswick proposal another time." "Of course we will," Ellie said, quietly, "because heaven forbid we discuss what's really going on here." She turned and left, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. Adam watched her go, his hands clenched at his sides, fighting the urge to call her back. Later that afternoon, a memo went out to all department heads. Effective immediately, all external collaboration proposals would require board approval. It was a direct shot across Ellie's bow, and they both knew it. In her office, Ellie read the memo with growing anger. Two could play at this game. If Adam Carter wanted to retreat behind corporate policy, fine. But she hadn't gotten where she was by giving up easily. She opened her laptop and began to type. Project proposal. Internal restructuring of innovation pipeline. If he wouldn't listen to her about Brunswick, she'd find another way to prove her point. She'd make him see that innovation, like love, required taking risks. 50 stories above Manhattan, two brilliant minds circled each other like planets trapped in each other's gravity, neither willing to break orbit, both knowing that eventually something had to give. The question was, who would break first? The Ice King or the woman who made him feel the heat of the sun? You can't be serious. Adam stared at the proposal on his desk, his knuckles white against the mahogany. Restructuring the entire innovation pipeline without board approval? Ellie leaned against his office doorframe, the morning sun highlighting auburn streaks in her dark hair. Actually, according to company bylaws, internal restructuring falls under the CEO's direct authority. No board approval needed. She'd done her homework. Of course she had. The proposal was brilliant, combining elements of agile methodology with her own innovative approach to team dynamics. It would revolutionize their development process, potentially doubling their output. And it would require them to work together closely for at least 6 weeks. "You're playing a dangerous game, Ms. Parker." "I'm doing my job, Mr. Carter, unless you're saying my ideas have less merit because of personal considerations." The challenge in her voice made his jaw clench. They both knew he couldn't reject the proposal without revealing exactly what he was trying to hide. She'd backed him into a corner with elegant precision. "Fine," he said finally. "We'll trial it. 1 month?" 6 weeks, she countered. "Proper. Implementation requires at least 6 weeks," he cut her off, standing. "But we do this my way. Daily progress reports, strict professional boundaries, and if I see any sign this is affecting company performance, it ends immediately." A smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Agreed. Shall we begin?" The next 3 weeks became an exquisite form of torture. They worked late into the evening, their heads bent together over project timelines and team structures. Every meeting crackled with unspoken tension, every accidental brush of hands sending electricity through them both. Ellie's plan was working better than anyone expected. Teams were more energized, projects moved faster, and innovation flourished. But it was the subtle changes in Adam that fascinated his employees most. "He actually laughed in the design review," one developer whispered to another, "like a real laugh." The Ice King was thawing, though he fought it at every step. When Ellie's enthusiasm for a breakthrough had her grabbing his arm, he'd stiffen, but wouldn't pull away. When she challenged his ideas, he'd argue back with increasing passion, their debates becoming the stuff of office legend. "Their arguments are better than movies," Rebecca confided to her assistant. Yesterday, she called him a bureaucratic dinosaur, and he looked like he wanted to kiss her just to shut her up. On a rainy Wednesday evening, 4 weeks into the project, They found themselves alone in the innovation lab. Prototype components littered the tables, and whiteboards covered in Ellie's flowing handwriting surrounded them. She'd kicked off her heels hours ago, padding around the lab in stockinged feet as she explained her latest iteration. "If we move the neural processing here," she said, reaching across Adam to adjust a component, "the response time improves by—" Her hand brushed his chest, and they both froze. She was close enough that he could feel the warmth of her body, could see the tiny flecks of gold in her green eyes. Time seemed to stop, the air heavy with possibility. "Ellie," he breathed, her name a warning or a prayer. She didn't move away. "Yes? We can't. Can't or won't." His hand moved of its own accord, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed for just a moment. The prototype between them sparked suddenly, a small flash that made them jump apart. Adam ran a hand through his hair, his composure visibly shaken. "It's late," he said roughly. "We should call it a night." Ellie straightened, disappointment and determination warring in her expression. "You know, for someone so invested in innovation, you're remarkably resistant to change, and you're remarkably persistent in pushing boundaries. Because I see what you could be, what we could be if you just take the risk." She gathered her things, her movements sharp with frustration. "The project stats prove I was right about restructuring. What else might I be right about, Adam?" She left him standing there, surrounded by the evidence of their shared vision, her question hanging in the air like a challenge. Through the lab's windows, the city lights blurred in the rain, reminiscent of another storm-swept night that had started all of this. Adam picked up the prototype that had sparked between them, studying it with unseeing eyes. In just a few weeks, Ellie Parker had transformed his company's entire development process, inspiring innovation and loyalty in equal measure. And in the process, she'd worked her way past every defense he'd built, making him question principles he'd lived by for years. The truly terrifying part, a growing voice inside him wondered if that might not be such a bad thing. His phone buzzed, a text from Rebecca reminding him about tomorrow's board meeting. Reality crashed back in. He was CEO of $1 billion company. He had responsibilities, expectations. He couldn't afford to let emotion cloud his judgment, no matter how tempting the source. But as he gathered his own things to leave, his eyes fell on the whiteboard where Ellie had written their project motto, "Innovation requires courage." Below it, in smaller letters, "So does living." The words followed him home, echoing in his mind like the ghost of her touch on his chest, a persistent reminder that some barriers, once recognized, become harder and harder to justify. The news hit like a thunderbolt on a clear day. Someone had leaked details of their innovation project to Vertex Systems, not just general concepts, but specific technical specifications. The same morning, Richard Brunswick announced a suspiciously similar initiative. Carter Technologies stock dropped 12 points. Adam paced his office like a caged lion, his phone buzzing incessantly with calls from board members and reporters. The betrayal cut deep, reminding him exactly why he'd built his walls so high in the first place. Trust was a liability. Always. Had been, always would be. "Mr. Carter," Rebecca's voice crackled through the intercom. "The board is demanding an emergency meeting, and Ms. Parker is here." His step faltered. Of course she was. Ellie Parker never ran from a fight, even when she should. Send her in. She entered like a storm front, her usual grace hardened by determination. "Before you say anything, I need you to know, did you do it?" The words came out harsher than he intended. Ellie recoiled as if he'd slapped her. "How dare you?" "Answer the question." "The fact that you're even asking tells me everything I need to know." Her voice trembled with hurt and anger. "You really haven't changed at all, have you? one setback, and you retreat right back into your fortress of suspicion. Adam braced his hands on his desk, struggling for control. Someone leaked those specs, Ellie. You were the one pushing for collaboration with Brunswick. You had access to everything. Because you trusted me with it, and I would never betray that trust. She moved closer, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Look me in the eye and tell me you really believe I did this. He couldn't. God help him, he couldn't. In the weeks they'd worked together, he'd seen her integrity, her passion, her absolute dedication to doing things the right way. The truth was, he trusted her more than he'd trusted anyone in years, and that terrified him. It doesn't matter what I believe, he said finally. The board will want a full investigation. All project leads will be suspended, pending... No, Ellie's voice cut through his professional distance. You don't get to hide behind corporate protocol. Not this time. Look at me, Adam. Something in her tone made him meet her gaze. She stood before him, fierce and beautiful in her righteousness, and his carefully constructed walls began to crumble. I know you're scared, she said softly. Scared of trusting, scared of feeling, scared of losing control. But I also know that when we work together, we create something extraordinary. The project proves it. The team knows it. The only person who can't see it is you. Ellie, his phone buzzed again. The board was waiting. The press was circling. His company was under attack. He needed to focus, to be the leader everyone expected him to be. But Ellie wasn't finished. You want to know who leaked those specs? Look at the technical details, Brunswick announced. The neural processing array, it's wrong, completely wrong. It's the decoy design we created last week when we suspected someone was accessing our servers. Adam went still. What are you saying? I'm saying I've been trying to tell you for weeks that we had a security breach, but you were so busy keeping your emotional distance that you missed all the signs. She pulled out her tablet, fingers flying over the screen. Here, the access. Logs, the data patterns, everything pointing to... Marcus Chen, Adam breathed, looking at the evidence. His VP of operations, a man he'd worked with for 5 years. He had full system access, and a gambling problem he thought no one knew about. Ellie's voice softened. I didn't say anything earlier because I needed proof. I couldn't risk... She swallowed hard. I couldn't risk you thinking it was me. The realization hit him like a physical blow. She'd been protecting him, protecting the company, all while he'd been pushing her away. And still, she'd stayed. Still, she'd fought. Without conscious thought, he reached for her, his hand cupping her cheek. She leaned into his touch, and something inside him broke free. I'm sorry, he whispered. I should have... A sharp knock interrupted them. Rebecca's voice was urgent. Mr. Carter, the board is threatening to call an emergency shareholder meeting. Reality crashed back in. They jumped apart, the moment shattered but not forgotten. Adam straightened his tie, his CEO mask sliding back into place. Send security to Marcus Chen's office, he ordered. Full system lockdown, and get me Brunswick. On the phone. Ellie gathered her tablet, professional once more. I'll compile all the evidence for the board. Ellie. He caught her arm as she turned to leave. Thank you for not giving up. On the project, on the company. On me, he didn't say, but his eyes conveyed it. She offered a small smile. Someone once told me innovation requires courage. As she left to brief the security team, Adam watched her go, his heart racing with more than just the corporate crisis. She'd saved his company, exposed a traitor, and proved him wrong about everything he thought he knew about trust. The question was, what was he going to do about it? His phone buzzed again. The board, the press, the 1,000 responsibilities of being CEO, all demanding his attention. But for the first time in years, Adam Carter found himself thinking beyond the next quarter's projections, beyond the safe confines of his emotional isolation. Because Ellie Parker had just shown him that sometimes the greatest innovations come not from protecting yourself, but from being brave enough to let someone in. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of board meetings, press statements, and legal proceedings. Marcus Chen's arrest made headlines, Brunswick publicly apologized for the misunderstanding, and Carter Technologies' stock rebounded. But for Adam Carter, the real aftermath was playing out in quieter moments, like now, watching Ellie brief the innovation team about enhanced security protocols. She stood confident and composed, her presence commanding the room's attention. When she caught him looking, the ghost of a smile touched her lips before she returned to her presentation. That smile haunted him through his next 3 meetings. So did the memory of her fierce defense of their project, her brilliant detection of the security breach, the way she'd stood her ground when he'd doubted her. She'd proved herself not just competent, but exceptional, in ways that went far beyond her professional capabilities. The press is calling her the guardian angel of Silicon Alley, Rebecca reported, dropping a stack of newspapers on his desk. The story's gone viral. A brilliant female executive saves tech giant from corporate espionage. They're eating it up. Adam picked up the top paper. Ellie's photo dominated the business section, caught in a moment of quiet confidence as she left the courthouse after testifying against Chen. The article praised her innovative leadership style and technical brilliance, but Adam found himself studying her eyes in the photograph, remembering how they'd flashed with hurt when he'd questioned her loyalty. "Sir?" Rebecca's voice pulled him back to the present. "The board is concerned." "About what?" "About you and Ms. Parker." She hesitated. "There are rumors." Of course there were. He'd seen the speculative glances, heard the whispers. His careful professional distance had slipped, revealing something too personal to ignore. "Thank you, Rebecca. That'll be all." Alone in his office, Adam stood at his windows, watching the city bustle below. He'd spent years building walls between himself and others, constructing a persona of cool detachment that had served him well, until Ellie Parker walked into his life and made him question everything. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Speaking of the devil, "Come in." Ellie entered, carrying a tablet and a determined expression he was coming to know well. "We need to talk about the innovation pipeline. The project's on hold pending the security review, which is exactly the wrong move." She set the tablet on his desk with perhaps more force than necessary. "We can't let Chen's betrayal derail everything we've built. The team's momentum, the breakthroughs we've made. It's too valuable to waste. The board needs reassurance that their CEO hasn't lost control." Her voice softened. "I get it, Adam, but retreating into your shell isn't the answer. Not this time." She stood close enough that he could smell her perfume, jasmine and something uniquely her. The scent brought back memories of late nights in the lab, heated, debates over design specs, moments when the line between professional and personal had blurred dangerously. "Why do you care so much?" he asked quietly. "About the project? About any of it? About me?" He didn't say, but the word hung between them. Ellie met his gaze steadily. "Because I see what you're capable of when you let your guard down. These past weeks, working together, that's the real Adam Carter, the one who gets excited about innovation, who challenges ideas because he cares about making them better, who inspires people instead of intimidating them. That man is a liability. That man is a leader worth following." She stepped closer, her eyes intent on his. "And worth loving." The word sent a shock through him. They'd been dancing around this for weeks, months even, but neither had dared name it. Until now. "Ellie," he warned, but his voice was rough with emotion. "We can't..." "Can't what?" "Care about each other? Trust each other?" because I hate to break it to you, but that ship has sailed." She laid her hand over his heart, and he wondered if she could feel it racing. "You trusted me when it mattered most. Trust yourself now." For one endless moment, he let himself imagine it, letting go of the rigid control, allowing himself to feel everything he'd been suppressing. The desire to pull her close was almost overwhelming. Then his phone buzzed. The board chairman's name flashed on the screen. Ellie stepped back, professional mask sliding into place. "The innovation team meeting is at 4. We need your decision by then." She turned to leave, but paused at the door. "You know what the really ironic part is? You're more afraid of love than you ever were of betrayal. At least with betrayal, you knew what to expect." The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Adam alone with her words echoing in his mind. She was right, of course. Ellie Parker had an infuriating habit of being right about him. His phone buzzed again, insistent. The chairman would want to discuss damage control, public relations, stock prices, all the things that had defined Adam's life for so long. But for the first time, they felt hollow compared to what he might be losing. Outside his window, the afternoon sun caught the glass towers of Manhattan, creating countless reflections. Somewhere in those reflections was the man he'd become, successful but isolated, powerful but alone. And somewhere else was the man Ellie saw, the one capable of both innovation and love. The question was, which reflection was real? And more importantly, which one did he want to be? The acquisition offer from TechFusion International arrived on a crisp autumn morning, exactly the kind of day that had brought Ellie Parker into Adam's life. The numbers were staggering. A merger. That would make Carter Technologies the dominant force in global tech innovation. The catch? He would need to relocate to Singapore for a minimum of 3 years to oversee the integration. "It's an unprecedented opportunity," the board chairman said, his voice eager through the speakerphone. "The Asian market, the technological synergies, it's everything we've worked toward." Adam sat in his office long after the call ended, watching shadows lengthen across Manhattan, everything they'd worked toward. But they didn't include the brilliant woman who transformed his company and his heart over the past months. A knock at his door broke his reverie. Ellie entered, her face alight with excitement. "The latest prototype results are incredible. The neural response time is twice what we projected. I think we've finally cracked." She stopped, noticing his expression. "What's wrong?" He pushed the merger document across his desk. Watching her read it was like watching clouds darken a sunny day. "Singapore," she said finally, her voice carefully neutral. "For 3 years. The board is unanimous. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. For the company or for you?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Adam stood, needing to move, to think. This is what building Carter Technologies has been about. Global reach, technological innovation on an unprecedented scale. "Is it?" Ellie set down the document. "Because I thought it was about creating something meaningful, something that changes lives." This merger would do exactly that. From 10,000 miles away. She stepped closer, her perfume wrapping around him like a memory of every late night they'd spent bringing their vision to life. "Tell me something, Adam. When you imagine this grand future for Carter Technologies, who do you see standing beside you?" His heart thundered in his chest. "Ellie, because I see us together, building something extraordinary, not just in business but in life." Her voice wavered slightly. "But maybe I've been reading this all wrong. Maybe those moments in the lab, the way you look at me when you think no one's watching, the connection we both feel, maybe it's all just another variable in your corporate equation." "You know it's not that simple." "Actually, it is." She moved even closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her eyes. You're just making it complicated because you're scared. Scared of choosing love over logic, scared of admitting that success means nothing if you're alone at the top. I can't just throw away everything I've built. No one's asking you to. I'm asking you to build something new, something better. She touched his face gently. You talk about innovation, about changing the world. But real change starts here. She pressed her hand to his heart, with the courage to choose what really matters. The touch burned through his suit, through years of careful control. Adam caught her hand, holding it against his chest. If you stay, we face whatever comes together. We build our future on our terms. Her eyes shone with unshed tears. But you have to choose, Adam. Really choose. Not just what's safe or expected, but what you want. A message chimed on his computer, the board requesting his formal response to the merger offer. The practical choice was clear. Take the deal, cement his legacy, continue on the path he'd planned. It was logical, sensible, safe, but as he looked at Ellie, fierce and beautiful in the fading light, another path beckoned. One that promised not just success, but joy. Not just achievement, but love. The board meeting is tomorrow morning, he said quietly. They'll want an answer. Ellie stepped back, squaring her shoulders. Then I guess we both have decisions to make. She turned to leave, but paused at the door. You know what the real innovation would be, Adam? Creating a life that's worth all the success you've achieved. But that's not something any merger can give you. The door closed behind her with a soft click that seemed to echo through his bones. Adam returned to his window, watching the city lights begin to twinkle in the gathering dusk. Somewhere out there was the future he'd always planned. Predictable, profitable, and perfectly empty. And somewhere else was a future he'd never dared imagine, one that sparkled with possibility and burned with the warmth of love. His phone buzzed, a message from Rebecca about tomorrow's board meeting agenda. In 12 hours he would have to stand before the board and determine not just the future of Carter Technologies, but the course of his own heart. The city sprawled before him, a maze of paths and possibilities. For the first time in his life, Adam Carter didn't know which direction to take, but he knew, with a certainty that shook him to his core, that his next choice would define not just his career, but his very soul. Adam's penthouse apartment overlooked Central Park, a multi-million-dollar testament to his success. Tonight it felt like a prison. He'd loosened his tie hours ago, shed his suit jacket, rolled up his sleeves, physical attempts to shed the weight of tomorrow's decision. The merger documents lay spread across his desk, numbers and projections that had once seemed so important now, blurring before his eyes. A glass of scotch sat untouched beside him. He'd poured it out of habit, the way he did every night before, reviewing contracts. But tonight was different. Tonight he needed clarity, not comfort. His father's voice echoed in his memory. Business is business, son. The moment you let feelings cloud your judgment is the moment you lose everything. How many times had he repeated those words to himself over the years, using them to justify every wall he'd built around his heart? But Ellie's voice was there too, challenging him. Real change starts here. He pressed his hand to his chest, remembering her touch, the way she'd looked at him with such fierce belief in what they could be together. The clock on his wall ticked past midnight. In less than 8 hours, he would stand before the board and make a decision that would change everything. The practical choice was clear. It had always been clear. The merger would cement Carter Technologies' global position, revolutionize their market reach, generate billions in shareholder value. It was the culmination of everything he'd worked toward. So why did it feel like surrender? He stood abruptly, moving to the windows. The city stretched before him, a tapestry of lights and shadows. Somewhere out there, Ellie was probably still in the lab, pouring her heart into their shared vision. He pulled out his phone, finding himself scrolling through photos from the project, candid shots of team meetings, prototype testing, moments captured by eager developers documenting their progress. There she was, explaining a design concept, her hands animated, eyes bright with passion. Another shot, both of them bent over a prototype, so absorbed in discussion they hadn't noticed the camera. The energy between them was palpable even in pixels. When had she become so essential to his world? It wasn't just her brilliance or beauty. It was the way she challenged him, pushed him to be better, to see beyond the safe confines of his carefully ordered existence. She made him want things he'd never allowed himself to want. His phone buzzed, a text from Rebecca. "Final merger documents ready for review." Adam set the phone down, running his hands through his hair. The logical arguments marched through his mind like soldiers. Market position, technological integration, global expansion, everything he'd dreamed of since taking over the company. But other dreams had crept in, unbidden. Dreams of morning coffee shared over prototype designs, of heated debates that ended in laughter, of building something extraordinary with someone who saw him, really saw him, and wasn't afraid to call him on his bullshit. He found himself at his home office, pulling out old files, his father's company's final reports, the documentation of its collapse. He'd studied these papers countless times, using them as a reminder of why emotions had no place in business. But tonight, something else caught his eye. A photo he'd buried at the bottom of the file. His father in happier days, arm around his mother, both of them beaming at the camera. He couldn't remember the last time he'd seen his father smile like that. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His father hadn't lost everything because he trusted too much. He'd lost everything because he'd trusted the wrong person. And in response, Adam had spent years trusting no one at all. Until Ellie. She'd proved her loyalty not through blind faith, but through actions. She'd saved his company while he was busy doubting her. She'd seen the truth about Chen while he was hiding behind protocols. She'd been right about everything, except one thing. He wasn't afraid of love being a weakness. He was afraid of how strong it made him feel. The first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the sky when Adam finally stood from his desk. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes tired, but his mind was clearer than it had been in weeks, maybe years. He picked up his phone, fingers hovering over Ellie's number. No, this wasn't a conversation for text or phone calls. This was about choosing a future, their future. And that deserved to be done face to face. The board meeting was in 3 hours, just enough time to put everything in motion. He headed for the shower, plans already forming. For the first time in his adult life, Adam Carter was about to do something completely illogical, something that would shock the board, anger the shareholders, and rewrite every rule he'd lived by. And somehow that felt more right than all the sensible decisions he'd ever made. The sun rose over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of possibility. In his bathroom mirror, Adam caught his own reflection, tired, rumpled, and wearing the first real smile he'd seen on his face in years. His father had been wrong about one crucial thing. The moment you let the right feelings guide your judgment isn't when you lose everything. It's when you finally find what you've been looking for all along. The Carter Technologies boardroom hummed with anticipation. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the expectant faces of board members and executives gathered for what they assumed would be a routine merger approval. Adam stood at the head of the table, outwardly composed in his perfectly tailored suit, inwardly electric with purpose. "Before we begin," he said, his voice carrying easily through the room, "I'd like to call in our innovation director." Murmurs of confusion rippled through the board as Ellie entered. She wore a sharp charcoal suit that matched her determined expression, but Adam caught the question in her eyes. He gave her a slight nod. "Trust me." "As you know," he continued, "we're here to discuss the Tech Fusion merger. The numbers are compelling. The market potential is extraordinary. The Asian expansion represents everything this company has worked toward." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "And I'm rejecting it." The room erupted. The chairman half rose from his seat, face flushing. "Carter, you can't—" "Actually, I can." Adam's voice cut through the chaos. "And before you quote shareholder obligations at me, I suggest you look at these." He nodded to Rebecca, who distributed tablets to each board member. The room fell silent as they absorbed the data on their screens. "What you're looking at is the preliminary market analysis of our new neural interface technology, the project Ms. Parker and I have been developing." He moved around the table, commanding attention with each step. "Conservative projections show it outperforming the merger benefits by a factor of 3 within 18 months. But the Asian market," one director began. "Will still be there," Adam cut in, "but we'll enter it on our terms, with our technology, controlled from right here in New York." His eyes found Ellie's. "Because some things are worth building from the ground up." The chairman leaned forward, eyes narrowed. "This is about her, isn't it? The rumors are irrelevant to the numbers in front of you," Adam said sharply. "But since you brought it up, yes, Ms. Parker is part of why I'm convinced this is the right move. Not because of any personal feelings, but because she showed me something I'd forgotten. True innovation doesn't come from playing it safe. It comes from having the courage to trust your vision." He turned to Ellie, whose eyes shone with something between hope and disbelief. "When Ms. Parker joined us, she didn't just bring technical brilliance. She brought a new way of thinking. She challenged our assumptions. She pushed us to be better." His voice softened. "She made me better." "This is highly irregular," another director protested. "So was Microsoft passing on the chance to buy Google," Adam countered. "So was Blockbuster laughing Netflix out of their boardroom." "The history of tech is written by those who dared to break from conventional wisdom." He planted his hands on the table, leaning forward. "I built this company by playing it safe, by never letting emotion cloud my judgment. And you know what? I was wrong." The room fell silent. Adam Carter, the Ice King of Silicon Alley, admitting he was wrong. It was unprecedented. The most successful innovations in history came from passion, from vision, from people who cared enough to fight for what they believed in. He straightened, squaring his shoulders. "I believe in this project. I believe in this team. And yes, I believe in Ellie Parker." He turned to face her fully now, no longer caring about the board's reaction. "I believe in us, in what we can build together. Not just technology, but a future, a life, and I'm done pretending otherwise." Ellie's eyes widened, her lips parting in surprise. The boardroom, the watching executives, the whole world seemed to fade away as Adam crossed to her. "I spent all night looking at numbers, trying to make the logical choice," he said softly. "But the truth is, I made my choice weeks ago. Every time you challenged me, every time you saw through my defenses, every time you made me want to be more than just a successful CEO." He took her hand, ignoring the gasps and murmurs around them. "I choose you, Ellie. I choose us. And if the board doesn't like it..." He turned back to the watching executives, his voice ringing with authority. "Then I suggest you look at those projections again, because I'm not going anywhere, and neither is she." The chairman cleared his throat. "This is unconventional." "No," Adam corrected, his fingers intertwined with Ellie's. "This is revolutionary. And isn't that what tech is supposed to be about?" A younger board member spoke up, eyes on his tablet. "These neural interface numbers, they're incredible. If we could fast-track development..." "We can," Ellie said, finding her voice. "The prototype is already exceeding expectations. With proper funding and support..." "You'll have it," Adam promised. Then to the board, "So, we can waste time debating my personal life, or we can focus on making history. Your choice." The room erupted in discussion, but Adam barely heard it. He was watching Ellie, seeing the joy and pride and love shining in her eyes. She squeezed his hand, a gesture that said more than words ever could. The chairman was calling for a vote. Rebecca was organizing the procedures, but for Adam, the hard part was over. He'd finally chosen truth over safety, love over logic. And somehow, against all his careful planning, it felt exactly right. Outside, the boardroom windows, the morning sun painted Manhattan in shades of gold, promising a new day, a new beginning. The Ice King of Silicon Alley was gone, melted away by the warmth of a love he'd never expected to find. And in its place stood something better, a man who had finally learned that the greatest innovation of all was having the courage to follow his heart. "You know," Ellie said, examining the prototype's neural interface display, "when I imagined you finally expressing your feelings, I didn't expect it to happen in front of the entire board of directors." 3 weeks had passed since the dramatic board meeting, and they were working late in the innovation lab. Well, supposedly working. Adam kept getting distracted by the way the blue light from the displays played across her features. "Would you have preferred skywriting?" he asked, moving to stand behind her. "Or perhaps a flash mob in Times Square?" She turned in her chair, eyes dancing with amusement. The Ice King, organizing a flash mob? Now that would have been revolutionary. Former Ice King," he corrected, pulling her up into his arms. "I've been reliably informed that I'm much warmer these days." She pretended to consider this, running her hands up his chest. "The team is still getting used to seeing you smile. Poor Davidson nearly dropped his coffee yesterday when you laughed at his quantum computing joke." The mention of the team sobered Adam slightly. Navigating their new dynamic as business partners and romantic partners hadn't been without its challenges. Some employees whispered about favoritism, others worried that personal friction might affect project decisions. Ellie sensed his tension. "Having second thoughts? About us? Never." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, marveling at how such a simple gesture could feel so intimate. "About how to balance everything, sometimes." "Good thing you have an innovation expert on staff," she teased. "I hear she's pretty good at solving complex problems." "Is that so?" He pulled her closer, breathing in her familiar jasmine scent. "Any recommendations?" "Well, first—" She was cut off by the lab door opening. Rebecca entered, then immediately started to back out. "Oh, I'm sorry, It's fine, Rebecca," Adam said, stepping back professionally, but keeping hold of Ellie's hand. "What is it?" "The press release about the neural interface project. PR wants to know how to handle questions about your relationship." Adam felt Ellie stiffen slightly beside him. They'd known this conversation was coming. The business world was buzzing with speculation about the Ice King's dramatic transformation and the woman who'd caused it. "Tell them the truth," he said, firmly. "Carter Technologies is developing groundbreaking technology under the joint leadership of its CEO and innovation director. If they ask about our personal relationship—" He looked at Ellie, raising an eyebrow in question. She squeezed his hand. "Tell them we believe the best innovations come from trust, partnership, and having the courage to challenge conventional wisdom." Rebecca smiled, making notes on her tablet. "Perfect. Oh, and the contractors called. They've finished the new office layout." After she left, Ellie turned to Adam with a grin. "I still can't believe you're giving up your private elevator. Lobby to make room for the expanded innovation lab. Technically, we're giving it up," he corrected, "since you agreed to move your office up to the executive floor." "Only because you agreed to replace those ridiculously intimidating black Marble walls with smart glass. She wrapped her arms around his neck. See, compromise. We're getting better at this. He kissed her softly, still amazed that he could do this now, show affection openly, without fear or hesitation. We had good motivation to figure it out. The prototype behind them beeped, demanding attention. They turned to find the neural response readings off the charts. Now that's interesting, Ellie mused, pulling reluctantly away to check the data. The emotional engagement markers are showing unprecedented stability. Adam watched her work, struck by how perfectly this moment encapsulated their new reality. Professional passion and personal connection intertwined, each making the other stronger. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "when I first hired you, I thought you'd be good for the company. I never imagined how good you'd be for me." She looked up, her expression softening. "Funny how innovation works, isn't it? Sometimes the best breakthroughs are the ones you never saw coming." The city lights twinkled beyond the lab windows, but neither of them moved to leave. They had a prototype to perfect, a presentation to finish, and 1,000 other tasks demanding attention. But they also had each other, and somehow that made everything else feel more exciting than overwhelming. "Davidson's quantum computing joke," Adam said suddenly. "Was it actually funny?" Ellie laughed, the sound echoing through the lab like music. "Not even slightly, but watching you pretend to get it, absolutely priceless." He pulled her back into his arms, marveling at how natural it felt now, this blend of teasing and tenderness, of professional respect and personal intimacy. "I love you," he said simply because he could, because the words no longer felt like a risk but a celebration. Her eyes sparkled. "I know. You announced it to the entire board, remember? And I'd do it again." "Good." She kissed him quickly, then turned back to the prototype. "Because I have a feeling this is just the beginning of our innovations together." Looking at their reflection in the lab windows, the former Ice King and the woman who'd melted his heart working side by side, Adam knew she was right. They were building something unprecedented. A partnership that defied categorization, a love story written in lines of code and late-night breakthroughs. And he wouldn't have it any other way. 1 year later, another storm raged outside the Carter Technologies Hotel. But this time, Adam Carter wasn't hiding behind corporate walls. Instead, he stood in the grand ballroom, watching Ellie charm investors at the Neural Interface Project's official launch gala. She was radiant in a midnight blue gown that matched the one she'd worn the night of their first storm, her success and happiness evident in every gesture. The prototype they'd labored over had evolved into a revolutionary product, and pre-orders were already breaking industry records. "Your quarterly projections were conservative," Richard Brunswick said, appearing at Adam's elbow. "The Asian market, potential alone, is exactly where it should be," Adam finished smoothly. "Under our control, developed at our pace." Richard smiled knowingly. "Some might say you made an emotional decision, turning down that merger. Some might say it was the most logical choice I've ever made." Adam watched as Ellie demonstrated the neural interface's capabilities to a group of wide-eyed tech journalists. "Sometimes the best business decisions come from listening to your heart." "Speaking of hearts," Richard nodded toward Ellie, "the Ice King seems to have fully thawed." Adam touched the small velvet box in his pocket, his own private innovation. Project months in the making. "You have no idea." The demonstration ended to enthusiastic applause. Ellie made her way through the crowd toward them, stopping to accept congratulations and answer questions. When she finally reached Adam, her eyes were bright with triumph. "The response is incredible," she said, slipping her hand into his. "Even the skeptics are convinced." "They should be." Adam squeezed her hand. "You've revolutionized not just the technology, but how we approach innovation itself." "We did," she corrected. "Together." Richard excused himself with a knowing smile, leaving them alone in the crowded room. Outside, lightning flashed, reminiscent of another stormy night that had changed everything. "Walk with me?" Adam asked softly. He led her through the hotel's elegant corridors to a familiar alcove, the same one where they'd stood during that first storm, when everything between them was still unspoken potential. "Feeling nostalgic," Ellie teased. "Feeling grateful." Adam turned to face her. "1 year ago I stood in this spot and tried to maintain professional distance. I thought I was protecting the company, protecting myself. I had no idea I was fighting against the best thing that would ever happen to me." Thunder rolled outside, but neither of them flinched. They'd weathered far bigger storms together. "You know what I remember about that night?" Ellie's voice was soft with memory. "How badly I wanted to shake you out of your self-imposed isolation. I could see the real you, trying to break free. You did shake me free. You challenged every wall I'd built, every rule I lived by." He took both her hands in his. "You made me realize that true innovation isn't just about technology. It's about having the courage to reimagine everything you thought you knew." "Adam." She must have heard something in his voice, because her eyes widened slightly. He pulled the velvet box from his pocket, sinking to one knee. "I've spent my life pursuing innovation, trying to create something that would change the world, but you showed me that the most meaningful changes start with one person being brave enough to love another." Ellie's free hand flew to her mouth as he opened the box, revealing a stunning ring. The design was unique, a platinum band that seemed to flow like liquid metal, cradling a diamond that caught and reflected light, like their first prototype's neural interface display. "I had it custom-made," he explained, his voice rough with emotion. "The design is based on the flow patterns from our first successful neural response test. The moment I realized I was falling in love with you." Tears spilled down Ellie's cheeks, but she was smiling. "Trust you to turn a marriage proposal into a tech innovation. Trust you to make me want to." He took a deep breath. "Ellie Parker, you walked into my life and challenged everything I thought I knew about success, about innovation, about love. Will you continue challenging me, inspiring me, and building something extraordinary with me? Will you marry me?" "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes!" As he slipped the ring onto her finger, applause erupted from the doorway. Their entire team stood watching, along with various board members and executives. Rebecca was openly crying. "Sorry," one of the developers said sheepishly. "Word got around that something big was happening tonight." Ellie laughed, pulling Adam to his feet and into a kiss that drew more cheers from their audience. When they broke apart, her eyes sparkled with mischief. "You know what this means?" she asked. "You'll have to update the company's policy on workplace relationships." "Already done." He kissed her again briefly. "New policy. Trust your heart, innovate boldly, and never let fear stop you from pursuing what matters most." Quite a change from the old Ice King days. "Well, you know what they say." He drew her close as their friends and colleagues surrounded them with congratulations. "The best innovations come from being willing to break all your own rules." Outside, the storm began to fade, but neither of them noticed. They were too busy looking forward to their next project, their next challenge, their next adventure, together. Because while their story had begun with an unexpected storm, it would continue through countless innovations, each one built on the strongest foundation of all, two hearts that had found their perfect match. In the end, Adam Carter hadn't just changed his company's future, he'd revolutionized his own life. And as he held Ellie close, surrounded by the family they'd built at Carter Technologies, he knew that this was his greatest innovation yet. A love that transformed everything it touched, turning barriers into bridges, fear into courage, and solitude into connection. Some might call it illogical, but he knew better now. The most powerful innovations often were. The end. That was a beautiful story, wasn't it? I hope you enjoyed it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your collaboration is very important to me.